Beneath the soulful riffs and timeless lyrics lies a haunting story, the story of Robbie Robertson, a name forever etched into the DNA of American music, yet rarely understood beyond the myth of the band. The polished frontman, the elegant guitarist, the quiet observer, these are the images the world knows. But what lies beneath is something far more complex, more personal, and more painful. Robbie Robertson lived in two worlds, never fully accepted by either. Born to a Mohawk mother from the Six Nations Reserve and a Jewish father he never knew who died mysteriously when Robbie was just a child, he grew up navigating a fractured sense of identity. He was a child of contradiction, Native heritage and Jewish blood, reservation values and Toronto city streets, poverty and promise. The path to rock stardom was paved not only with opportunity but also with heartbreak, silence, and secrets he could never quite shake. The dark side of Robbie Robertson isn't about scandal or crime, it's about the emotional costs of genius, the betrayals among brothers, and the psychological toll of being the one who survived when others didn't. From the earliest days, Robbie was drawn to storytelling, not just through lyrics, but through rhythm, mood, and myth. He learned guitar from relatives on the Six Nations Reserve, soaking in the oral traditions of his mother's people, while also feeling the cold distance of Toronto's post-war cultural alienation. When he joined Ronnie Hawkins' Hawks as a teenager, he wasn't just playing music, he was escaping something, even if he couldn't name it. And then came Bob Dylan, the lightning strike. When Dylan went electric and the folk world turned on him, Robertson and the Hawks backed him on stage night after night to a hailstorm of boos and heckles. They became lightning rods for change, and in the process, they became something more, a band that forged its identity through battle. But even here, cracks formed. Dylan was the legend, the Hawks were the muscle. When they returned from tour, they were transformed, especially Robertson, who began writing songs steeped in Americana, even though he was a Canadian outsider with no Southern roots. Yet somehow, he channeled the ghosts of the Civil War, the sorrow of the working man, and the mystical echoes of the Mississippi Delta better than most who'd grown up there. When the band finally emerged from Dylan's shadow with music from Big Pink, they weren't just a group of musicians, they were prophets. But Robbie, always reserved, always meticulous, became something else, the architect. And with that role came resentment. Levin Helm, Rick Danko, Richard Manuel, and Garth Hudson, all immense talents, began to feel the sting of unequal credit. Robbie was credited as the sole songwriter on many of the group's most famous tracks, but Levin especially felt that the band's music was more collaborative, more collective. The pain of watching royalties pile up for one man while others struggled left deep wounds, especially as substance abuse began to corrode the group from within. Robertson, who largely avoided the drugs and chaos, found himself in a strange position, the clean one among the wreckage. He tried to steer the ship, but the others saw him as steering it in his own direction. He wasn't just the bandleader, he became the businessman, the dealmaker, the one who sided with management, while the others drowned in addiction and bitterness. By the time The Last Waltz was conceived, the band was already fractured beyond repair. What was billed as a farewell concert was, for many, a funeral. Levin later said he never agreed to the breakup. Others resented how Robbie took center stage in the film, narrated the mythology, and seemed to write the final chapter on behalf of everyone else. In truth, The Last Waltz was Robertson's way of preserving legacy while others were falling apart. Richard Manuel would later hang himself in a motel room, Rick Danko would die in relative obscurity, and Levin Helm would continue to play and write, often with a chip on his shoulder and a grudge against Robertson that never truly faded. The darkest part of Robbie's story may be that he lived long enough to become a monument while his brothers became ghosts, yet the tragedy of Robbie Robertson isn't that he survived, it's that survival came with guilt. In interviews, especially in his later years, you can hear it in his voice, the longing, the sadness, the sense that no amount of success could make peace with the past. He carried the burden of knowing that his greatest art came from collective energy, from people he couldn't save. And layered beneath that was his own personal history, the unresolved trauma of childhood, the secrecy surrounding his father's death, the spiritual confusion of navigating both Mohawk and Jewish identities in a world that accepted neither. He later said that learning the truth about his real father, a Jewish gambler tied to the underworld, shook his sense of self to the core. For decades, he lived with the knowledge that the man he called his dad wasn't his biological father, and The man who had died violently and mysteriously, possibly murdered. These were things he rarely spoke of publicly, but they were always there, shaping his music, shaping his silence. His solo career, beginning in the late 80s, was cinematic, brooding, and soaked in the mythology of the American landscape. Albums like Robbie Robertson and Storyville were not commercial smashes, but they were rich with storytelling, painting vast emotional canvases that revealed a man still wrestling with ghosts. Later collaborations with filmmaker Martin Scorsese brought him back into the public eye, but even those scores, haunting and textured, seemed to speak more of inner journeys than outward success. His final works, especially cinematic, are drenched in reflection songs that sound like conversations with the dead, with himself, with the past he could never escape. Robbie Robertson wasn't a villain, but he wasn't a saint either. He was an artist shaped by chaos, driven by a need for control, for legacy, for clarity in a life that gave him very little of it. His brilliance as a songwriter cannot be denied. He wrote with poetry, pain, and purpose, but the cost of that brilliance was steep. The band, once brothers in arms, ended in fragmentation. The music lives on, but the relationships never healed. And Robbie, for all his elegance and mystique, lived with that reality longer than any of them. There's something haunting about outliving your era, about carrying the torch long after the others are gone, about being the narrator of a story only you can finish, but one that was written by many hands. That was Robbie Robertson's final chapter, a man, both myth and man, forever searching for home between nations, between bands, between truths. His death in 2023 closed a chapter in rock history, but it also left us with questions. What if things had been different? What if the credits were shared more fairly? What if the weight he carried wasn't so heavy? In the end, the dark side of Robbie Robertson isn't found in scandalous headlines or tabloid dirt. It's found in the silence between notes, in the looks shared across a stage that meant more than words, in the loneliness of genius. It's found in the ache of a man who gave the world music that felt eternal, while his own sense of self was always unfinished, unresolved. The world will remember him for The Wait, for Up on Cripple Creek, for shaping a genre that blended blues, folk, gospel, and country into something new. But we should also remember him as the boy from Two Bloodlines, the man who lost his brothers, and the artist who kept creating even when there was no one left to play beside him. Subscribe to Hollywood Untold for more emotional stories behind music legends and the feuds that shaped rock history. Tap the bell to never miss a beat.